I watched my stepsister Vanessa adjust my cashmere scarf in the mirror, the ivory one with the delicate silver threading that grandmother had sent me for my 16th birthday. She preened, turning this way and that, letting it drape over her shoulders like she was some sort of fashion icon. The winter formal was in 3 hours, and she had just discovered that her planned outfit, a strapless emerald gown, would leave her shoulders exposed in the December cold. "This is perfect," she breathed, running her fingers over the fabric. "It's like it was made for my dress." I said nothing. I couldn't. In my first life, I had screamed, cried, begged her not to take it. I had explained that it was the last gift grandmother gave me before she died, that it was irreplaceable, that it meant everything to me. Vanessa had laughed in my face, called me selfish, and taken it anyway. When I tried to physically stop her, she'd shoved me so hard I'd fallen and hit my head on the corner of her vanity. The scar had been visible for months, but that was my first life. This time, I was 18 again, standing in the doorway of Vanessa's bedroom with full knowledge of everything that was about to unfold. I had died at 23, poisoned slowly by my stepmother Elena's health supplements, after I'd started asking too many questions about my father's will. I'd spent my final hours in a hospital bed, finally understanding that the family I desperately tried to please had been planning my demise since the day my father married Elena. Now reborn on the morning of my 16th birthday, I had a second chance. "You don't mind, do you, Emma?" Vanessa asked, though it wasn't really a question. She never actually cared about my answer. "Of course not," I said sweetly. "It looks beautiful on you." Her eyes widened slightly. She'd been expecting a fight, but then her expression shifted to smug satisfaction. "I knew you'd understand. You're not even going to the formal anyway. So, what would you need it for?" That was true. In my first life, I hadn't gone. My stepmother had accidentally spilled red wine all over my dress that afternoon, and there hadn't been time to find a replacement. I'd spent the night crying in my room while my father took Elena and Vanessa out to expensive dinner, celebrating Vanessa's big night. This time would be different. "You're right," I agreed. "I hope you have a wonderful time." Vanessa turned back to the mirror, already dismissing me. I left her room and walked down the hallway to my own much smaller bedroom, the converted storage room at the back of the house that Elena had insisted was more appropriate for my needs after she moved in. In my first life, I had accepted this indignity, just as I had accepted all the others. Let me take you back to the beginning to help you understand how deeply the rot ran in this family. My mother died when I was 6 years old. For 4 years, it was just Dad and me. He was a successful patent attorney with his own firm, and while he traveled often for work, he made sure I had everything I needed. He hired a wonderful nanny named Mrs. Chen, who became like a second mother to me. We were happy, or as happy as we could be with the whole mom's absence left. Then, when I was 10, Dad met Elena at a legal conference. She was a paralegal at a rival firm, beautiful and charming and seemingly devoted to both him and me. She had a daughter my age, Vanessa, and Dad thought it would be perfect. "I'd have a sister," he said. "A complete family again." The mask came off the day after the wedding. Elena fired Mrs. Chen, claiming we didn't need a nanny now that we had a real mother in the house. She moved Vanessa into the large bedroom that had been mine, the one with the window seat and built-in bookshelves, and relocated me to the storage room. When I protested to my father, Elena cried and said I was being ungrateful, that she was trying her best to blend our families and I was making it impossible. Dad, desperate to make his new marriage work, believed her. It got worse from there, much worse. Elena controlled all the household finances, claiming she was helping Dad by taking that burden off his shoulders. My allowance, which had been generous, disappeared. Vanessa got new clothes every season while I wore the same outfits until they were threadbare. When I outgrew my shoes and my feet hurt, Elena told Dad I was being dramatic and wasteful. I learned to stuff newspaper in the toes. The emotional abuse was worse than the financial neglect. Vanessa and Elena formed an alliance, a united front dedicated to making me feel small. They mocked my interests, my appearance, my grades. When I excelled at school, they said I was showing off. When I struggled, they said I was stupid. Nothing I did was ever right. My father, meanwhile, grew more and more distant. Elena had a way of scheduling couples trips and romantic dinners whenever I tried to talk to him. She'd intercept my attempts to reach out, screening his calls and emails through her. By the time I was 13, I barely saw him except at formal family dinners, where I was expected to sit quietly and agree with whatever Elena said. The only person who saw through it all was my grandmother, my mother's mother, Lillian Chen. She lived across the country in San Francisco, but she called me every week and sent me gifts for every occasion. The cashmere scarf had been her last gift to me. She died 2 months after my 16th birthday in my first life, and I'd later learned that Elena had prevented me from attending the funeral, telling grandmother's estate lawyer that I was too distraught to make the trip. I found out years later, too late, that grandmother had left me everything: her house in San Francisco, her considerable stock portfolio, a trust fund worth millions. Elena had hidden the inheritance from me, forging my signature on documents that declined the inheritance in favor of my loving stepmother who had raised me. By the time I discovered the truth, the statute of limitations had passed. But the cruelest blow, the one that had ultimately led to my murder, came when my father died suddenly of a heart attack when I was 21. I discovered that his will, the one he'd made after marrying Elena, left everything to her with only a small trust for me that would be managed by Elena until I turned 30. Elena, of course, had drafted that will herself, had pressured Dad to sign it during one of their romantic getaways. When I started asking questions, when I hired a lawyer and began investigating whether the will could be contested, Elena started adding things to my food. "Vitamins," she said. "You look so tired, dear. You need to take better care of yourself." I died in the hospital, my liver failing, my kidneys shutting down. The doctors called it a tragic case of supplement contamination. Elena inherited everything and put on quite a show at my funeral. Vanessa hadn't even bothered to attend. Now, standing in my small room in my 16-year-old body, I had the chance to rewrite everything. But I had to be smart. I had to be patient. Elena was cunning and manipulative, and one wrong move would alert her that something had changed. The winter formal was just the beginning of my revenge, but it would set the tone for everything that followed. I opened my closet and pulled out the dress Elena had already ruined with wine, except she hadn't yet. That wouldn't happen for another 2 hours, right before she was supposed to drive me to the formal. She thought she was so clever, timing it so I'd have no recourse. I had learned in those last bitter months of my first life that Elena had been systematically sabotaging me for years. Every accident had been carefully planned. Every misunderstanding had been deliberate. She had poisoned my relationship with my father, isolated me from potential friends and allies, and ensured that I remained dependent and powerless. Not anymore. I wrapped the dress carefully in a garment bag and carried it to my car, a beat-up sedan I'd bought with money from my part-time job at the library, since Elena refused to help me purchase a vehicle. I drove to a storage unit I'd rented using a credit card I'd hidden from Elena and placed the dress inside along with several other items I'd been quietly removing from the house over the past 2 months. Since my rebirth, I'd been preparing. I'd started documenting everything, taking photos of my inadequate room compared to Vanessa's luxury suite, recording Elena's cruel comments on my phone, keeping receipts that showed the disparity in how money was spent on Vanessa versus me. I'd also been reaching out to people Elena had cut out of my life. The most important was Marcus Chen, my grandmother's lawyer. In my first life, I hadn't known he existed until after grandmother died. This time, I'd called him 2 weeks after my rebirth on my 16th birthday. "Mr. Chen," I'd said when he answered, "my name is Emma Whitmore. I'm Lillian Chen's granddaughter." There had been a long pause. "Emma, your grandmother speaks of you often. She's been trying to reach you, but your stepmother says you're always too busy with school activities." "My stepmother is a liar," I'd said bluntly. "And I need your help." We'd had a long conversation. I'd explained the situation, carefully without mentioning my rebirth, framing it as a sudden realization of how isolated I'd become. Marcus had been alarmed but not entirely surprised. Grandmother, he told me, had been worried for some time. "She's changed her will recently," he'd said. "Everything goes to you, with an independent trustee to manage the estate until you're 25. She specifically excluded your stepmother and stepsister, citing concerns about their influence." Is she sick?" I'd asked, my throat tight. I knew grandmother would die, but I didn't know if I could prevent it. She has stage 4 pancreatic cancer, Marcus had said gently. She has perhaps 4 to 6 months. She wants to see you, Emma. She wants to see you very much. I'd flown to San Francisco the next weekend, telling Elena I was going on a school trip. Grandmother had been frail, but still sharp, still loving. We'd spent 3 days together, and I'd told her everything. Well, almost everything. I didn't mention the rebirth, but I told her about the abuse, the isolation, the financial control. I suspected, she'd whispered, holding my hand. But every time I tried to visit, Elena said you were away. Every time I sent gifts, she said you were grateful. I should have known. I should have fought harder. It's not your fault, I'd said. But I need your help now. I need to protect myself, and I need to make sure they can't hurt me anymore. We'd made plans. Grandmother had immediately added provisions to her will that would expose any attempt by Elena to intercept the inheritance. She'd also set up a trust in my name with a different bank, transferring money there that Elena couldn't touch. Not a fortune, not yet, but enough to give me independence. When I'm gone, Grandmother had said, you'll have the resources to fight. But Emma, sweetheart, you have to be careful. If your stepmother is as dangerous as you say, you need to protect yourself until you have the upper hand. I will, I'd promised. I'm going to make them pay for everything, but I'm going to be smart about it. Now, 2 months after that visit, Grandmother was still alive. The doctors had been surprised by her sudden rally, attributing it to improved spirits. She'd told me privately that having hope, having something to fight for, had given her new strength. We talked every week, using a phone Marcus had given me that Elena didn't know about. But back to the winter formal, I had a plan, and it was deliciously ironic. After storing the scene at the Tracy dress, I drove to an upscale boutique in the city, one I'd discovered in my first life but never been able to afford. Using money from Grandmother's trust, I purchased a stunning gown, a strapless silver creation that hugged my figure and flared at the knees with delicate beading that caught the light. It was gorgeous, far more beautiful than the simple blue dress Elena was planning to ruin. I also bought a professional-grade camera and gave it to my friend Marcus, not the lawyer, but Marcus Rivera, a quiet boy in my photography class who'd been kind to me. In my first life, we'd been friends before Elena had systematically destroyed that relationship by accidentally spreading rumors that I'd said cruel things about him. This time, I'd apologized for things I hadn't yet done, confused him thoroughly, and then explained that my stepmother was manipulative. He'd been skeptical but willing to give me a chance. I need you to photograph the winter formal, I'd said. Specifically, I need you to follow my stepsister Vanessa and document everything she does. That's kind of weird, Emma, Marcus had said. I know, but trust me. By the end of the night, you'll understand, and I'll pay you $500. Money talked, Marcus agreed. The afternoon of the formal, I came home right on schedule. Elena was in the kitchen, a glass of red wine conspicuously placed on the counter near where she'd asked me to set down my backpack. Oh, Emma, darling, she said in that syrupy voice she used when she wanted something. Could you help me with dinner? Just set your bag down there and grab the salad bowl from the fridge. In my first life, I'd complied immediately. My backpack had bumped the wine glass, sending it toppling directly onto my dress, which I'd foolishly left hanging on the back of a chair because Elena had insisted the steamer in the laundry room was ready for me to use. This time, I kept my backpack on my shoulder and walked around the far side of the counter. Actually, I'm running late for a hair appointment, I said sweetly. Vanessa said I could borrow her stylist's canceled slot. Wasn't that nice of her? Elena's eyes narrowed. She knew Vanessa hadn't said any such thing because Vanessa would never do anything nice for me. But she couldn't call me out without revealing that she knew Vanessa's schedule better than Vanessa did. That's lovely, she said tightly. But your dress? Oh, I'm getting ready at Jessica's house, I said, naming a girl from school I barely knew. We're going to do each other's makeup. Didn't I mention that? I hadn't mentioned it because it wasn't true, but Elena couldn't prove otherwise. She stood there, wine glass in hand, her carefully planned sabotage falling apart. I left before she could regroup, drove to a hotel room I'd rented, and got ready properly. I did my own hair and makeup. I'd always been good at it, though Elena had mocked me for being vain whenever I tried. The silver dress fit perfectly, and when I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. In my first life, I'd been dowdy, dressed in Elena's hand-me-downs and Vanessa's rejects, my hair unstyled and my posture hunched from trying to make myself invisible. Now I stood straight, my hair in glossy waves, my makeup highlighting features I'd forgotten were pretty. I arrived at the winter formal fashionably late, paid for my own ticket with grandmother's money, and walked into the decorated gymnasium like I owned the place. The reaction was immediate. Heads turned. People whispered. I saw Vanessa across the room, her face contorting with rage and disbelief. She wore the emerald gown, just as I remembered, and draped over her shoulders, looking increasingly ridiculous as the heated gymnasium made her sweat, was my grandmother's cashmere scarf. In my first life, Vanessa had been the belle of the ball. She'd won Winter Formal Queen, had been surrounded by admirers all night, and had used my scarf as a prop in dozens of photos that she'd posted online, claiming it was a vintage find she'd discovered. This time, several things were different. First, I'd tipped off the fashion blog run by Melissa Park, the school's style maven, about the scarf's true origin and value. I'd shown her photos of grandmother wearing it in San Francisco, along with the receipt showing it had cost $3,000. I'd explained, tearfully, that Vanessa had borrowed it without asking and that I was too afraid of Elena to ask for it back. Melissa, who had her own step-family issues, had been sympathetic and outraged. She'd posted about it that afternoon, not naming names but describing a certain someone who would be wearing stolen goods to the formal. Second, Marcus Rivera was there with his camera, and he was very good at his job. He'd been photographing Vanessa all evening, capturing her increasingly sweaty and uncomfortable appearance as she refused to remove the scarf despite the heat. She looked bundled, overwrought, desperate, like she was trying too hard. Third, and most importantly, I'd made sure I looked stunning. Not just pretty, transcendent. I'd spent grandmother's money on a professional spray tan, on perfect hair and makeup, on the kind of elegant simplicity that Vanessa's over-accessorized look couldn't compete with. Vanessa tried to approach me several times that night, but I was always surrounded by people. Boys who'd never noticed me before asking me to dance. Girls who'd been friendly but distant now, wanting to talk. The quiet library girl had transformed into someone interesting, mysterious, confident, and all night, people kept glancing at Vanessa, then at their phones, putting together the pieces of Melissa's blog post. The formal had a social media wall where people could post photos with a special hashtag. Marcus had been uploading his shots of Vanessa throughout the night. Sweaty, uncomfortable, overdressed. Each photo had dozens of comments and not kind ones. Why is she wearing a scarf inside? Someone's trying too hard. Isn't that the stolen scarf from @Melissa Park Styles blog? Bundled like an onion lull. By the time the Winter Formal Queen was announced, a popular senior girl named Ashley, who actually deserved it, Vanessa's social standing had taken a critical hit. She left early, pulling off the scarf and throwing it on a chair in the coat check room, her face blotchy with tears of rage. I retrieved the scarf carefully, wrapping it in tissue paper. It smelled like Vanessa's overwhelming perfume, but could be cleaned. That night was a small victory, but it was symbolic. I'd beaten Vanessa at her own game using the same tools, social media, public opinion, careful manipulation that she'd used against me in my first life. More importantly, I'd shown myself that I could fight back, that I could win. But the real war was just beginning. When I got home that night, early enough to still seem like the meek Emma that Elena expected, I found my stepmother waiting in the living room. "Did you have fun?" she asked, her voice cold. "Yes," simply. "Where did you get that dress?" "I saved up from my library job." Not technically a lie. I had saved up, even though I'd used grandmother's money. Elena's eyes narrowed. "That dress cost more than you make in 6 months. "I got it on clearance," I lied smoothly. There was a small stain on the hem, so they marked it down significantly. She didn't believe me, but she couldn't prove otherwise. I saw the calculation in her eyes, the reassessment. I'd done something unexpected, something that didn't fit her narrative of who I was. "Well," she said finally, "I hope you're not getting ideas above your station. You're still expected to keep up with your chores and responsibilities. This house doesn't run itself." "Of course," I said. I wouldn't dream of shirking my duties. I went to my small room and lay on my narrow bed, my beautiful dress carefully hung up, and smiled in the darkness. The game had begun, and Elena didn't even know she was playing yet. The next few months were a careful dance of seeming compliance while quietly building my strength. I continued documenting everything, creating a record of abuse that would be undeniable. I maintained my grades, perfect scores, because in my first life I'd learned that my intelligence was one of the few things Elena couldn't take away from me. And I stayed in contact with grandmother and Marcus Chen, building the legal framework that would protect me. Grandmother died in April, peacefully in her sleep. I was with her, having flown out under the guise of a school trip. Elena didn't know I'd gone, and she certainly didn't know what grandmother and I had finalized in those last weeks. The will reading was scheduled for 2 weeks after the funeral. Marcus Chen contacted Elena directly, informing her that as Emma Whitmore's stepmother and Imanite guardian, she needed to attend. I watched Elena's face when she received the call. She was confused. She hadn't known that grandmother had died, since I'd carefully kept that information from her. But she was also curious. My mother's mother, dying with an estate to distribute? Elena's greed was predictable. "Emma," she called out, "did you know your grandmother passed away?" "Yes," I said quietly. I found out from a distant cousin. I didn't think you'd want to be bothered with it." "Of course I want to be bothered with it. She was your grandmother. We should have attended the funeral." Elena's performance of care was nauseating. "I didn't think we could afford the trip," I said meekly. "And you always said grandmother was a bad influence, that she spoiled me." Elena waved that away. "A family is family, Emma. We'll attend this will reading together. It's the respectful thing to do." What she meant was, there might be money, and I want to make sure I control it. The will reading was held in Marcus Chen's San Francisco office. Elena insisted we all attend. Her, Vanessa, my father, and me. It was one of the few times in years that we'd done something as a family. Marcus Chen's office was impressive. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay, expensive furniture, walls lined with legal texts and framed awards. Elena looked around with barely concealed avarice. I could see her mind working, calculating what grandmother must have been worth to afford such a prestigious attorney. "Thank you all for coming," Marcus said, his face professionally neutral. "Let's begin." The first part of the will covered small bequests, donations to charities, gifts to longtime friends and employees. Then Marcus reached the heart of the matter. "To my beloved granddaughter, Emma Lillian Whitmore, I leave the entirety of my remaining estate, including but not limited to my residence at 2847 Pacific Heights Boulevard, San Francisco. My stock portfolio currently valued at approximately $4.7 million, my savings and checking accounts totaling $1.2 million, my art collection, my jewelry, and all other personal property." The room went silent. Elena's face had turned an alarming shade of red. Vanessa's mouth hung open. My father looked stunned. "Furthermore," Marcus continued, his eyes now fixed on Elena, "I have taken certain precautions to ensure this inheritance reaches my granddaughter intact. Emma's inheritance will be held in a trust managed by Chen and Associates until she reaches the age of 25, or until she completes a 4-year college degree, whichever comes first. The trust will provide for all her educational expenses, living expenses, and healthcare needs. Her legal guardians have no access to or control over these funds." Elena found her voice. "This is ridiculous. I'm her mother." "Stepmother," Marcus corrected coldly. And Mrs. Chen was quite clear in her wishes. She had concerns about Emma's living situation and wanted to ensure Emma's financial security could not be compromised. "What concerns?" my father asked, speaking for the first time. He looked confused, hurt. "Has Emma been complaining about us?" "Mrs. Chen formed her own impressions," Marcus said diplomatically. "She was a very observant woman." "This will can be contested," Elena hissed, "on the grounds of undue influence. Emma clearly manipulated a sick old woman." "I would strongly advise against that course of action," Marcus interrupted. Mrs. Chen anticipated that possibility and took steps to document her mental competency and her reasoning. She also left a letter for Emma to be read in private, that details her observations and concerns. Should anyone contest this will, that letter will become part of the public record. The threat was clear. Grandmother had documented everything I'd told her, and while it wouldn't necessarily hold up in criminal court, it would destroy Elena's reputation. The public revelation that she'd abused and neglected her stepdaughter while living off her husband's money would be devastating, especially in our small town where appearance was everything. Elena sat back, her mind clearly racing through options. I could see her reaching the same conclusion I'd hoped for. It was better to let me have grandmother's money and maintain her control over dad's much larger estate. She'd just have to accelerate her plans. Fine, she said tightly. Obviously, Lillian wanted to provide for Emma's future. That's very generous. Her tone suggested it was anything but. There's one more thing, Marcus said, looking at me. Emma, your grandmother has also left you a letter to be read in my presence. If you'd like, we can excuse the others. Elena looked like she wanted to protest, but my father stood. Come on, Elena, Vanessa. Let's give Emma some privacy. When they'd left, Elena practically dragging Vanessa out, Marcus handed me an envelope. Inside was grandmother's familiar handwriting. My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, I'm gone. But I hope I've given you the tools you need to build a good life. The money, the house, these are just things. What matters is that you're free now. Free to make your own choices, to pursue your own dreams. But Emma, sweetheart, please be careful. I've included in your trust fund enough money to hire a private investigator and, if necessary, a bodyguard. I'm not being paranoid. Your stepmother is dangerous. She married your father for his money, and she spent years isolating you to ensure you couldn't threaten her control. Marcus has instructions to help you with anything you need. Legal protection, security arrangements, even emancipation if that's what you want. You're 16 now, and while you're not quite an adult, you're old enough to make informed decisions with proper legal guidance. I love you, my darling girl. I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you better in life, but I hope I've given you the means to protect yourself. Now, be strong, be smart, and never let them make you feel small again. All my love, grandmother. I read the letter twice, tears streaming down my face. Marcus handed me a box of tissues and waited patiently. She was right, I said finally. About everything. Elena is dangerous. I know, hey, Marcus said. That's why I'm giving you this. He handed me a business card. This is a private investigator who specializes in financial fraud and domestic abuse cases. I've already briefed him on your situation. He's ready to begin surveillance whenever you give the word. And this, he handed me another card, is a personal security consultant. He can arrange protection if you feel you're in physical danger. I looked at the cards, then at Marcus. You really believe Elena would hurt me? Emma, he said gently, your grandmother believed it. And I've been doing this for 30 years. I've seen families do terrible things for money. Your father's estate is worth approximately $15 million. If something happened to you, and if your father's will leaves everything to Elena. He didn't need to finish. I already knew. In my first life, that's exactly what had happened. I want to hire the investigator, I said. And I want to start documenting everything legally. If something happens to me, I want there to be a record. Smart girl, Marcus said. He made a phone call, and within an hour, I was meeting with David Reyes, a former FBI agent who now ran a private investigation firm. David was in his 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He listened to my story, the version without the rebirth, the version that was just a girl slowly realizing how much danger she was in. I can help you, he said when I finished. But I need you to understand something. If we're going to build a case, it's going to take time. We need evidence that will hold up in court. That means surveillance, forensic accounting, possibly even getting search warrants if we find evidence of criminal activity. How long? I asked. Months, maybe a year. And you'll have to go back to that house, continue living with these people while we build the case. Can you do that? I thought about my first life, about the years of abuse I'd endured. I'd already lived through worse. Yes, I said, I can. I can do that, but I want to make sure I'm protected. If Elena tries anything, we'll have someone watching, David assured me. Not obvious, but close enough to intervene if necessary. And Marcus has already started paperwork for emancipation, just in case we need to pull you out quickly. Over the next few months, I lived a double life. At home, I was the same quiet, obedient Emma that Elena expected. I did my chores, kept my grades perfect, and asked for nothing. Elena, meanwhile, had become even more controlling, paranoid that I might use grandmother's money to escape. She didn't know that David's team was documenting everything. They'd placed cameras in my room, with my permission, that captured Elena's late-night searches through my belongings. They'd installed keylogger software on the family computers that revealed Elena's frequent searches for information about trust funds, inheritance laws, and, most damningly, various poisons and their symptoms. The forensic accountant David hired discovered that Elena had been systematically embezzling from my father's law firm, using her position as office manager to redirect funds into secret accounts. She'd stolen nearly $500,000 over the years, covering her tracks with carefully doctored books. But the most damning evidence came when David managed to get a sample of the vitamin supplements Elena had started giving me again. She'd been so pleased when I'd accepted them without protest, not realizing that I immediately gave them to David's team for analysis. They contained arsenic, small doses designed to build up slowly in my system and cause organ failure over time, exactly what had killed me in my first life. We have enough, David told me in June, 3 months after grandmother's death. We have evidence of embezzlement, attempted murder, and child abuse. The DA is ready to move forward with charges. Wait, I said. I had a better plan. I want to give her more rope to hang herself with, and I want my father to see the truth. David looked skeptical, but he'd learned to trust my instincts. What did you have in mind? My father's firm is having its annual partners' dinner in August. It's a big event, all the partners and their families, plus important clients. Very formal, very public. I want to make sure Elena attends. And then? And then we expose everything, publicly, in front of everyone who matters to her. David smiled slowly. That's cold, Emma. She killed me once, I said flatly. She was killing me again. Cold is the least she deserves. We spent the next 2 months preparing. David coordinated with the DA's office to time the arrest perfectly. Marcus helped me prepare a civil lawsuit to recover the embezzled funds and sue for damages. And I carefully manipulated events to ensure Elena would be exactly where I wanted her when everything came crashing down. The hard part was my father. I still loved him despite everything. He'd been a weak man, easily manipulated by Elena, but he wasn't evil, he was just absent. He'd checked out of parenting, let Elena take over, and convinced himself everything was fine. But I needed him to see the truth. I needed him to understand what he'd allowed to happen. 2 weeks before the partners' dinner, I accidentally left my bottle of vitamin supplements where he'd see them. When he asked about them, I said Elena had given them to me to help with my health. Are you feeling sick? He asked, actually looking at me, really looking at me for the first time in months. I've been tired, I said. Elena says it's normal for teenagers, but she wanted me to take these just in case. I saw concern flicker across his face. Maybe you should see a doctor instead, just to be safe. Elena says doctors are too expensive, and I'm being dramatic. I delivered the line perfectly, defeated, resigned, hopeless. That's ridiculous. You're my daughter. We can afford a doctor. He reached for the vitamin bottle. Let me see those. I handed them over, watching as he examined the label. It was a generic brand, nothing suspicious on the surface, but I'd planted the seed of doubt. I'll make you an appointment, he said. With Dr. Morrison, this week. Elena was furious when she found out, but she couldn't object too strenuously without raising suspicion. I went to the doctor, gave him samples of the vitamins as requested, and waited. Dr. Morrison called my father directly. I wasn't privy to the conversation, but I watched Dad's face as he took the call in his study. I saw confusion shift to shock, then to horror. When he hung up, he sat at his desk for a long time staring at nothing. Then he called Marcus Chen. I don't know what they discussed, but the next morning, Dad took me to breakfast. Just the two of us for the first time in years. Emma, he said, his voice rough. Dr. Morrison found something in those vitamins. He's reported it to the police. There's going to be an investigation. I let my eyes widen. What did he find? Poison, he said flatly. Someone's been poisoning you. I didn't have to fake my tears. Yes, I'd known it was coming, but hearing my father, my actual father, say it out loud, seeing the devastation on his face broke something open inside me. I'm so sorry, he whispered, reaching across the table to take my hand. Emma, I'm so sorry. I should have protected you. I should have seen... His voice broke. It was Elena, wasn't it? I said quietly. He nodded, his face gray. The police are testing everything in the house, but Emma, the lawyer, Marcus Chen, he told me about your grandmother's will, about the concerns she had. He said there's been an investigator looking into our family, into Elena. Did he tell you what they found? Some of it, enough to know that I've been a fool. Worse than a fool, I've been a coward. I let that woman abuse you for years because it was easier than confronting her. I chose my comfort over your safety. Dad, no, let me finish. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I'm going to make this right. Elena is done. She'll never hurt you again. I promise you that. For the first time in years, in 2 lifetimes, I felt a flicker of hope about my father. Maybe he could change. Maybe he could become the dad I remembered from before Elena. The partners' dinner, I said, is it still happening? He looked surprised. Yes, but you don't have to go. After everything, I want to go, I said firmly up. I want to be there when everyone finds out the truth. I want to watch her face. Dad studied me for a long moment, seeing something in my expression that made him sad and proud at the same time. Okay, he said, if that's what you want. But Emma, it's going to be very public. Very ugly. Good, I said. Let it be ugly. Let everyone see who she really is. The night of the partners' dinner, I wore a black dress, elegant, sophisticated, expensive. I'd bought it with my own money from grandmother's trust, and I'd had my hair and makeup done professionally. I looked older than 16, poised and confident. Elena wore designer everything, dripping in jewelry that she'd bought with Dad's money. Vanessa was there too, in a dress that was trying too hard to be sexy and failing. They both looked at me with undisguised hatred, but they couldn't say anything. Not here, not in public. The dinner was at the city's most exclusive hotel in a ballroom that could seat 300. All the partners and their families were there, along with the firm's most important clients. It was the social event of the season, the kind of thing Elena lived for. We made it through cocktail hour and the main course. I watched Elena work the room, schmoozing with the senior partners' wives, laughing at jokes, playing the perfect attorney's wife. She was good at it. I'd give her that. If you didn't know what she was, you'd never guess. Dessert had just been served when the doors to the ballroom opened, and 2 police detectives walked in, flanked by uniformed officers. The room fell silent. Elena Whitmore? One of the detectives called out. Elena stood up slowly, her face pale but composed. Yes? You're under arrest for attempted murder, child endangerment, and embezzlement. The detective began reading her Miranda rights as officers approached our table. The ballroom erupted. People gasped, whispered, pulled out their phones. Elena's carefully constructed facade cracked. This is absurd, she shrieked. I haven't done anything. This is a mistake. We have evidence that you've been systematically poisoning your stepdaughter with arsenic-laced supplements, the detective said calmly, loudly enough for everyone to hear. We also have evidence that you've embezzled nearly $500,000 from Whitmore and Associates over the past 6 years. That's a lie. Emma is lying. She's trying to steal my husband's money. She manipulated her grandmother. Mrs. Whitmore, you have the right to remain silent. The detective interrupted. I suggest you exercise it. But Elena was past reason. She turned on me, her face contorted with rage. You little bitch! After everything I've done for you, I gave you a home, a family. You gave me a storage closet and slow death, I said clearly, standing up so everyone could see me, hear me. You abused me for 6 years. You stole my inheritance. You tried to murder me, and now everyone knows what you are. Elena lunged at me, but the officers caught her. She struggled, screaming. Obscenities, all pretense of refinement gone. It was a spectacular breakdown, and every phone in the room was recording it. As they dragged her away, Vanessa tried to follow. Mom! Mom! Wait! Miss Whitmore, another detective, approached her. We'd like to ask you some questions down at the station. You're not under arrest, but we believe you may have information relevant to our investigation. Vanessa's face crumpled. Without her mother to hide behind, she was just a scared girl who'd been complicit in terrible things. I might have felt sorry for her if I didn't remember every cruel word, every casual cruelty. The ballroom was chaos. My father's partners were in emergency discussions. The scandal would affect the firm. There was no avoiding it. Clients were concerned. The press would have a field day. But I felt nothing but relief. It was over. Finally over. My father stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder. Are you okay? He asked quietly. I will be, I said. The trial was a media sensation. Elena tried to claim innocence, but the evidence was overwhelming. The arsenic in the vitamins, the embezzlement trail, the documentation of abuse, it all painted a damning picture. David Reyes had done his job well. Vanessa testified against her mother in exchange for immunity. She admitted knowing about the poison, knowing about the embezzlement, knowing about the abuse. She claimed she'd been too scared to speak up, that Elena had threatened her too. I didn't believe her for a second, but the jury did. Elena was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 25 years in prison. The civil suit was even more satisfying. Not only did I recover all the embezzled funds, but I was also awarded damages for pain and suffering, medical expenses, and emotional distress. The total came to over $2 million on top of what grandmother had left me. My father divorced Elena immediately. He restructured his will, leaving everything to me with proper safeguards. He also started therapy and actually showed up to sessions, working through his guilt and his failures. We'd never have the relationship we'd had before Elena, but we built something new, something honest. I graduated high school a year early. Turned out that when you're not being actively sabotaged, academic success comes easily. I got into Stanford, where I studied law and business, preparing myself to take over Dad's firm someday if I wanted. But first, I moved into grandmother's house in San Francisco. I had it renovated, turning it into exactly the kind of home I'd always dreamed of. I started a foundation in grandmother's name, helping other children in abusive situations access legal resources and protection. I also started writing. I told my story, carefully anonymized, but true in all the ways that mattered. The book became a bestseller, reaching other girls who were living the nightmare I'd escaped. The money from that went into the foundation too. Vanessa tried to contact me a few times over the years, apology emails, requests to meet, claims that she'd changed. I never responded. Some bridges, once burned, aren't worth rebuilding. As for my scarf, the cashmere one grandmother had given me, I had it professionally cleaned and framed, along with a photo of grandmother wearing it. It hangs in my office now, a reminder of where I came from and who fought for me. On my 25th birthday, the trust from grandmother fully transferred to my control. I threw a party at the San Francisco house, a real party, with people who actually cared about me. Dad was there, sober and proud. Marcus Chen was there, having become a sort of uncle figure over the years. David Reyes came, bringing his wife and telling embarrassing stories about my investigation phase. And as I stood on the terrace overlooking the bay, surrounded by genuine friends and real family, I thought about my first life. That Emma had died alone, poisoned, defeated. She'd never known her own worth, never fought back, never won. But I'd taken her pain and turned it into power. I'd taken her death and made it mean something. I'd been reborn with knowledge, yes, but that alone wouldn't have saved me. What saved me was the decision to fight, to be smart, to use every advantage I had and create new ones where none existed. Elena had tried to break me, to make me small and afraid. Instead, she'd forged me into someone strong enough to destroy her. And in the end, she wore my scarf to her downfall, wrapped in stolen goods and false dignity, while I stood free in the truth. That winter formal had been just the beginning, a preview of the reversal to come. Vanessa had looked bundled, desperate, trying to hide behind accessories and stolen goods. I'd gone strapless. Exposed but unafraid, claiming space I'd been denied. It was a fitting metaphor for everything that followed. They'd tried to bury me, but they didn't know I was a seed. And seeds, when planted in the right soil, grow into something unstoppable. I was free, I was wealthy, I was powerful, and I had never, ever felt small again.